Kenya's aviation sector contributed Kenya shillings 425 billion to GDP in 2023 and supports 460,000 jobs. With Africa's aviation market projected to grow at 3.7 annually over the next 20 years, the potential for this substantial economic and social benefits to grow are enormous. For Kenya to efficiently tap into this growth, aviation experts are pushing for various strategies, including infrastructure improvement at the Jomo Kenyatta International Airport and collaboration among stakeholders, as well as alignment with global standards. Regina Manyara engages International Air Transport Association Director General Willie Walsh on the future of Kenya's aviation sector.
Now, the aviation sector contributes between 5 to 7% of Kenya's GDP, supporting sectors like tourism, horticulture, and logistics. I'm Regina Manyara. We're going to be looking at the way forward for Kenya's aviation industry as informed by the latest report by IATA. And to take us through this conversation is none other than the Director General, Willie Walsh of IATA. Thank you, sir, for your time.
Thank you.
Now, just to start us off, when you compare other African states when it comes to their aviation industry, where do you rank Kenya?
I think Kenya ranks highly in the overall ranking of Africa. It's a long-established airline with Kenya Airways. I think it's a very popular destination for tourism. It's got a very strong export market, particularly around things like fresh flowers, horticulture, which is well established. So it's got reasonable infrastructure. I think that's an area that we've highlighted as an area that needs to be focused on for the future if Kenya and Africa is to take advantage of the opportunities that exist.
3.3 billion in terms of contribution to GDP. That is the sum there, either directly or indirectly, and the report actually highlights or rather emphasizes on air cargo, on exports like flowers and fresh produce. So how can Kenya then further leverage the aviation sector to boost agriculture and tourism sectors?
Well, I think you build on the progress that you've made. As I said, the market is well established. You'll have flowers that are grown in Kenya being exported to Amsterdam, the big flower market, and then distributed across Europe. The great thing about it is the flowers are grown sort of naturally here in Kenya, whereas in Europe they require a lot of support. So it's much more efficient from an economic and an environmental point of view for the product to be grown here in Africa and then exported to Europe. And I think that's something that Kenya has done very well. To do that efficiently, though, you have to have good infrastructure. You have to have good cargo infrastructure at the airport. You clearly need the network. So Amsterdam is a big market for Kenyan exports. And you need to have good services from the airlines, not just Kenya Airways, but also the foreign airlines who are serving the market here. But I think there's a very solid foundation to build on. And it should be very encouraging for the government here when you look at what progress has been made, what can be done in the future, particularly if you get everybody working together.
Now, looking at the latest report, some of the recommendations that you've zeroed on is passenger and cargo facilitation. Unpack that for us.
I think Kenya's made progress with the electronic application for visa, but the simpler and more efficient, or the most efficient you can make it, the better for everybody. You want to have welcoming arrival so that people arriving into Kenya feel that the country wants them there, wants them contributing to the economy. So you need proper infrastructure at the airports. You have already got the airlines. That's the great thing. Kenya Airways has invested in their product. Other airlines competing with Kenya Airways or collaborating with them through the SkyTeam Alliance have made significant investment. We want to make sure that when the customer arrives at the airport that they can go through the immigration process easily and in a way that makes them, as I said, feel welcome in the country. For cargo, it's pretty much the same. You have to have good infrastructure for cargo, and you have to have good customs facilities so that the product can be moved quickly. In a lot of cases, particularly when you look at the export market from Kenya, it's fresh flowers, horticultural products that need to move quickly. You can't have them held up in cargo facilities or waiting customs clearance. So it's very important that airlines, airports, customs, immigration, government work together to ensure that the process is as smooth and as efficient as possible.
Let's zero in. There was a conversation sometime last year with some proposals to expand our main international airport, and that is the Jomo Kenyatta International Airport. From your assessment, is this the direction we need to take, or can we still work with what we have but now make it more efficient?
I think you've got to spend money to invest in the infrastructure. There are some of the facilities look like temporary facilities. It is the gateway to Kenya. It's the first thing that people will see when they arrive in Kenya if it's your first time visiting. We don't need expensive infrastructure. We need efficient, cost-effective infrastructure. So you don't need to spend huge sums of money. You make sure that the money you are spending is being spent in the right areas. And that's why I think airports and airlines have to work together. The airport needs to understand what it is the airline will need, not just today, but will need for the next 5 years, 10 years, 15 years. When an airline makes an investment in an aircraft, it's a 25-year investment, and they will want to know that they will get good use out of that aircraft over the life of the aircraft. So I think the airport does need some investment. I guarantee you that any investment that's made in the airport will have a significant return, building on the economic contribution that aviation already makes to Kenya.
Mm-hmm. You have recommended training of the workforce within the aviation industry. And how will then this also impact on the efficiency as well as a customer, experience?
Well, I think it's a great opportunity, again, for Kenya. You've got a young population, which is very important for the future. Kenya Airways is a training partner of IATA, providing training facilities, and anything we can do to upskill our young people has to be welcomed by everybody. So, I think any training that's done now is a significant investment for the future. And we will require, as an industry, more and more people working in the industry, particularly if it's to facilitate the exciting growth that we see here in the market in Kenya and in Africa generally. But you have to train your people.
Now, when you look at the aviation industry within Africa, we have seen various economies, let's say for example, Egypt, and there's been a comment on around overpricing. And we're finding ourselves as Kenya teetering on overpricing owing to a myriad of issues, maybe infrastructure challenges and also congestion, especially at JKIA. What recommendations then would you have to avoid this particular pitfall?
Yeah, I think it's very important. So if you look at the industry in Africa and even just in Kenya, airlines in Africa pay the highest price for fuel, significantly higher, about 17–18% higher than the industry average. It means that fuel is the single biggest cost element in the industry. Typically, it would be around 40% of an airline's cost base, whereas the average for the global industry is about 25%. So we have to look at, why is there such a significantly higher price for fuel in Africa compared to other places. Some of that is down to infrastructure, refining capacity on the continent. Some of that, I think, though, is also because it's not as efficient as it could be compared to other parts of the world. So, cost of operating in Africa is probably the highest of any part of the world that we look at, which means, obviously, that it's a bigger struggle for airlines to be profitable. And when we look at profitability on a regional basis, Africa is the least profitable. On average this year, we expect the industry to make a net profit of about $1 for every passenger that is flown, compared to $7 globally. So it's significantly lagging. Fuel costs, higher taxation, high infrastructure costs, and all of these are actually slowing down the growth of the industry in Africa.
So do you think Kenya has a potential, for sustainable aviation fuel?
Without question. I think this is one of the most exciting things that I see about Africa. I'm a strong believer, actually, in the future of Africa through aviation. And one of the contributions that can be made is the development of a sustainable fuel. And not just for aviation, because if you're producing sustainable fuel for aviation, you can use it for other forms of transport as well.
So what partnerships would you recommend for Kenya to scale up on this?
You've got the most important thing, which is the resource, the feedstock, which is in abundance in Kenya and in Africa. So there's multiple feedstocks that can be used to create sustainable fuel. What we need is to encourage investment. Now, that investment is likely to come from outside of Kenya. So you need to ensure that the government understands that there is willing investment, but that these investors will want to know that they can make a credible return on the investment they're making. But I think this is one of the biggest opportunities for Africa, because what you have is the ability to create a completely new industry that will sustain jobs, will improve the environment, and significantly improve the economy, because you'll be importing less fuel. So it's a great win-win for everybody.
Now, in the geopolitical setup, the U.S. recently expanded tariffs, on goods like EVs, batteries. How are these policies likely to affect, African airlines, with a keen interest, especially for Kenya, when it comes to air cargo demand?
It's clearly going to have a big impact on cargo with these tariffs in place. I think what you'll see, though, is if you like, a resetting of the global trade environment. Kenya, the markets that are important for Kenya today, Europe is obviously a very established market and will continue to have good growth opportunities. I think there's fantastic growth opportunities in Asia. So while North America is an important market, there's other parts of the world where Kenya and Kenya Airways will reach out to take advantage of the change in trading dynamics as a result of the introduction of tariffs
So you're saying
in
we
North America.
diversify our portfolio?
Well, I think it's an opportunity. I think everybody's going to be looking for that. If you're going to face tariffs in one country, does it make other countries more attractive as a result of lower non-existing tariffs?
Okay. So what impact do you think, with the tariffs that have been imposed on the Canadian and the Mexican aircraft parts likely to have on airlines like Kenya Airways?
Yeah, it's important that traditionally aviation is not included in any tariff. It operates tariff-free. And that's because it's a global supply chain. So, Boeing aircraft manufactured in the US requires parts from all around the world. And if those parts are going to face tariffs going into the US to, form part of a Boeing aircraft built in the US, it's going to be more expensive when you try and export that. So we're optimistic, actually, that aviation will be carved out and we won't see airlines facing additional aircraft charges as a result of the tariff regime. And that's traditionally the way it's operated under a global agreement that was reached back in 1979.
Now, when you talk about advocacy and diversification, what can African governments, do to mitigate on tariff-related, disruptions and the role of trade agreements like the African Continental Free Trade Area?
The more you can trade with your closest partners, the better. And I think that's one of the things that has slowed down the growth of aviation in Africa. What you need is what we have in Europe, what you have in the US, what you have in other parts of the world, which is a single market. No barriers that enables you to trade more efficiently with your closest neighbors. It's almost a surprise when we look at Africa that more trade is done with countries outside of Africa than is done with your neighbours, and I think that's an opportunity to reevaluate.
Actually, travelling within Africa is at times more costly than travelling abroad. How so?
It's more difficult.
Do you correct that?
Well, it has to be corrected by the adoption of what we call the single aviation market in Africa, which is a principle, if you like, that has been agreed, a concept that has been agreed for many years. But when it comes to implementing it, there's been very little progress being made. And that would make a huge difference. It facilitated enormous growth in aviation in Europe and made aviation much more accessible to millions, tens of millions of people. And I think the same opportunity exists in Africa.
So what do you think is the main bottleneck? You know, we've been talking about it for years, but nothing has been done.
It tends to be politics and protectionism. And in some cases, it's a fear of what would happen if I open up my market. You know, will I be able to benefit from it? Will others take advantage of me opening my market? So it tends to be that fear of the unknown consequences. But you know, I would say to people, look at what's happened in other parts of the world. Look at the opportunities and the growth and the economic contribution that has come as a result of removing these restrictions on doing business.
IATA targets a net zero carbon by 2050. How can Kenya, with its limited resources, contribute to this meaningfully and while growing its aviation sector?
Well, one of the big contributions could be through the development of sustainable aviation fuel. The world is going to need a lot more sustainable aviation fuel than is currently being developed. And as I said, what Africa has is incredible resources that can be used to create these sustainable fuels. So I think Africa can produce fuel not just for the African market, but can produce fuel that can be used to export and support the very challenging goal, actually, of getting to net zero in 2050 for the airline industry.
What's your comment on funding to the aviation industry, especially within this particular market, the Kenyan market?
Yeah, it's tough. You know, you've got to accept that cost of borrowing in Kenya is much higher than, you know, the average when we look around the world, which is another challenge for the industry here. But I think when you look at all of the challenges, you can see these as being, you know, possible to overcome if you're willing to accept that the contribution that aviation can make is very real. So the contribution to GDP, the contribution to jobs, which we estimate in the wider value chain is getting close to 500,000 jobs in Kenya, at least 460,000. Beyond the direct jobs in the airline, I think that's where the payback gets from trying to remove some of these barriers. And many of these barriers are artificial. You know, they can be removed if you're working together.
Now, geopolitics. Russia-Ukraine war, so, you know, rerouted flights and such, raising fuel costs. How do such conflicts, you know, threaten African aviation recovery, and what contingency plans can we put in place as Africa? I
think we know what measures we can take and what needs to be done. So I'm very confident for the future of the industry.
All right. So e-commerce is booming in Kenya. You know, how can aviation better support this growth, especially with the new US? You know, we're seeing tariff rules on small packages and such. How can we support this?
The removal of the de minimis, so goods of less than $800 going into the US, that is going to have a big impact. But again, I think what you'll see is goods that were earmarked for the US market, they're still being produced. So, you know, people will be looking for new markets to serve, and I think that represents the opportunity. But e-commerce has been a significant growth area, and we've seen that in terms of the contribution that air cargo makes to airline profitability. Very important. It's a very important part of the market in Kenya and for Kenya Airways, and you know, both the airline and the market serves that position very well. So I think e-commerce is definitely an opportunity for the future.
What do you think, or rather, what is your vision for Kenya's aviation sector, given what are the trends within the continent?
Africa is now ahead of where we were in 2019, which is very encouraging. And it recovered quicker than we had expected, again, which is very positive. So I think that points to the opportunities that exist here. If I look at growth over the past 25 years, the African market has grown at about 3.8% per annum, which has lagged the growth in the global industry, which was at about 4.2%. Looking forward over the next 20 years, we see Africa actually growing faster than the industry, now at about 3.7, so very close to what it's been growing over the past 25 years, whereas the global industry is likely to be closer to 3.2, 3.3%. So again, I think actually growth in Africa could way exceed that if we addressed all of those earlier challenges that you outlined.
For the Kenyan aviation sector, what recommendations would you give to stakeholders to prioritize so that we can realize this growth?
But it does require you to work collaboratively, to understand what the airline is going to need to be able to grow over the next 5, 10, 15, 20 years, and to make sure that you've got the right infrastructure available the airport. And the government's in a great position to facilitate that.
What do you want to see in the most immediate term?
I think it's awareness of the contribution that aviation can make. It's looking at the airline industry and seeing what others around the world have seen, that this is going to facilitate great economic growth that will be positive for your economy, positive for your people, and very positive for the future.
There you have it. We have been speaking to none other than the Director General in charge of IATA, Willie Walsh, just putting into perspective matters of the aviation sector with a keen interest in relooking at how government is going to work with various airlines as well as the airports to create synergy and drive this sector that contributes between 5 to 7% of the gross domestic product. I'm Regina Manyara. You're watching KBC Channel 1.